Aloha, everyone, and welcome to our show, Staying Young at Heart. My name is Maria Mera. I'm your host, and I'm also a financial advisor with Edward Jones. Today, we are going to talk about something that is becoming more and more relevant, ventilators and their use. And to help me learn more about the topic, we have a doctor of public health and respiratory therapies. His name is Ron Sanderson, and he's also the author of a recently published book called Ventilators and their use, what you want to know if your loved one is on life support. Ron, thank you very much for joining us. Good afternoon.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me on your show.
So first question, did you write this book for COVID-19 or was this something that was in the works before?
That's a great question. I intended to write a book like this for many years, thinking that these ventilators are so complex that people don't understand what's going on in the ICU environment. But then when COVID came along, ventilator became a household word. And respiratory therapists, nobody had heard of them. When you think of hospitals, you think of doctors and nurses. So now ventilators and respiratory therapists are kind of household words, and all these extra people are on the machine. So I thought, now's the time to do it.
So what is the respiratory therapist? Let's start by that.
Well, we help people breathe. And, in the simplest case, maybe it's just someone short of breath because of an asthma attack, or perhaps they smoke too much in their life or something like that. But at the other end of it, of course, is this life support and being on breathing machines. And so we are the people that actually operate the breathing machines. Now, of course, we work with doctors who tell us, what they want for the patient and some of the ventilator settings. But we set the settings and then we fine tune the ventilator to the patient. So we work very closely with nurses and with the physicians in the hospital.
So you work only with the ventilators, or a therapist is someone who can help you learn how to breathe or better, or is there a pre-work, or is basically just when the ventilator comes into play?
No, you're absolutely right. We work in respiratory rehabilitation or pulmonary rehabilitation, helping people learn how to breathe if they've got breathing problems. We give people medications for asthma when they're really sick. And so respiratory therapists mostly work in hospitals with sick patients throughout the hospital, not just the ICU where the ventilators are. And also some in home care. Some people at home are on ventilators and need a respiratory therapist to stop by every once in a while and make sure everything's all right with them.
So what makes someone not be able to? And you're going to have to educate me during half an hour. But so I understand breathing is something that we do involuntarily. So once there is that the fact that we are breathing, how can we force the body to breathe?
Well, that's the thing. We don't think about our breathing, but we breathe all the time without thinking about it. I mean, you and I now are doing very special breathing while we're talking. We take in a breath and we regulate our breath without even thinking about it to talk, and then suck in another breath. But normally we just lie around and we're breathing. And so why would you need a respiratory therapist? Well, it's when that process doesn't work properly. And of course, the most common thing that really causes it to fail is either the airways going into the lungs, from our mouth and nose down to our lungs, they get obstructed for some reason. Well, that makes it really difficult to breathe. Or perhaps our lungs get full of some kind of fluid. It might be an infection, or many other kinds of fluids can come into the lungs. So those are the most common reasons that, we might not breathe and would need to be perhaps put on a machine if it's bad enough.
So is that what happened for patients of COVID-19, that they were getting fluid in their lungs?
Yes, it seems that there's a couple of things going on, and the COVID thing is really complicated. So I don't think we could really have the last word on it yet. But for sure, we know that they have a viral infection in their lungs. And so parts of their lungs close down and get full of fluids. And it also appears that, the blood has to flow to the lungs and pick up the oxygen and then go back to the body. Well, those small blood vessels in the lungs seem to get inflamed also and shut down, perhaps. And so it's a really a big mess down there where the business of breathing is going on. And as a result, the person's not getting enough oxygen to their brain, their heart. And then that's the main reason we have to intervene with COVID-19.
Okay, so let's go back to ventilators, the machine. How do they work?
Well, that's a great question. When we breathe normally, we don't think about it. But if we take a breath in, we're actually sucking the breath in. So we call that negative pressure. The machines blow the air in. So we have to put some sort of a seal on the person's face or in their airway in order to seal it shut so the machine can then push the air in. So kind of like a tire pump or,
Okay.
Yeah.
So how long can a person be breathing through a ventilator?
Well, to be safe, the best amount of time is the least amount of time possible. But let's say worst case scenario, someone loses their ability to breathe because let's say they're not getting a signal from their brain to breathe anymore, or their breathing muscles are so weak and they will never get strong again. They might spend the rest of their life on a ventilator. I've known patients who've been on ventilators for many years. And if they can establish a quality of life, it's wonderful for them because they can see their loved ones, they can watch TV, they can eat, they can enjoy their lives, which isn't generally the case in the ICU. So these people would have gone through the really acute phase of being sick and being supported by the machine, and then stay on it perhaps the rest of their life. But this book is mainly about the acute situation in the intensive care unit. So you can imagine the family sitting in the waiting room, or these days they can't even go in the hospital. So sitting at home wondering and worrying, what in the world's going on?
What is the time period that you consider acute versus chronic?
These patients with COVID-19, for example, are generally staying on for 2 weeks to a month. At a month, no matter who you are and why you got there, we start thinking of the person as being chronic, because by the time a month has come, we've tried many different ways to get the person off the machine because it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, all kinds of reasons. You don't want to be on one if you don't have to. So normally people are on the machine maybe average 3 to 5 days.
So have you seen cases with when a patient has been chronic with a ventilator for over a month and then goes back to being back to their regular life?
It does happen sometimes, but it's unusual.
Okay. So when you're in the ventilator, do the rest of your body, like your organs, keep functioning, or do they start shutting down?
Well, that's why we put people on the machines, is to keep oxygen flowing into the person's body so their other organs can function properly, and to get the carbon dioxide out of the body, which also causes malfunction of just about every organ in the body. So yes, that's what the ventilator is there to do, is to support the patient's other organs in life. Now, in the intensive care unit, many patients have more than one system failing. So It may be the heart, it may be the liver or whatever, but the ventilator is only going to take care of the breathing and keep everything else going, hopefully.
So what is the survival rate?
It really varies on why the person went on the machine in the first place. I mean, we don't think about it, but if we come out of the operating room from a really big heart surgery, let's say, or maybe an abdominal surgery, they might come out on a ventilator for a few hours, maybe overnight, and then be off. And so those people will almost 100% of the time do fine. In a few hours or the next morning, we pull the tubes out of their throat or the masks off their face, and they're ready to breathe on their own and go on about their getting well in life. With people with this thing called acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is what one of the things is caused by COVID, among other things. The survival rate in that is probably around 70%, 75%. So that means 25, 30% of the people are not getting off of the machine and are probably passing away.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much for helping with this fascinating but difficult topic. We are going to take a break here, and we will be right back in 1 minute. Welcome back. We are talking to Ron Sanderson, author of Ventilators and Their Use. And one topic that I want to dig in is the part of the title that is called What You Want to Know If Your Loved One is on Life Support. Ron, this is hard. So what if I don't want to go on a ventilator and I refuse? Can I do that?
Absolutely. However, it's not simple. I mean, if in advance you have made a living will or this thing called a physician-ordered life support choice, and you have it, let's say, on your refrigerator, then if you suddenly quit breathing and someone calls 911, they come, they won't put you on a machine. But it has to be absolutely clear.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in the hospital, you talk to your doctor, you agree to your doctor, you don't want to be put on this machine, then you don't go on the machine. So it's pretty simple.
And is this different state by state in the US? Can you or is in the same way for everyone in every state?
I think it's pretty much the same. However, I'm sure the states that it will vary state to state, because we've had some big cases in the United States where either a family wanted their person off the machine and the medical people in the hospital didn't think it was appropriate because they thought they still had a chance, or vice versa. And those things have gotten complicated. But for the most part, it's not complicated, because when the physician talks with the family very honestly and forthright, and if possible, talks to the patient very honestly and forthright, then everyone can come to a decision that's best for the patient.
Okay, so is this something that we should do in like writing our will or a durable a living trust, or how do we can I just write it in the paper? I don't want to go in a ventilator, and that will hold.
Well, that probably would, but the best way to do is a thing called advanced directives. And usually you'd make an advanced directive with an attorney like a will, and you state in there, I don't want to go on life support. I don't want tube feedings, I don't want this or that or the other thing, or please do everything. And
so health directive with a state attorney would be the best way to do this.
Absolutely. And then share it with your family. Because if you don't share it with your family, and for some reason you quit breathing right in front of a family member, they're going to totally go crazy and call 911. And then when the ambulance people come, they're not going to be digging through your file cabinet to read your advanced directive. They're just take care of you. So in that case, you want this thing called POLST, physician ordered. I'm forgetting the name of it now, but anyway, it's a green piece of paper and you stick it on your refrigerator. If you think you're going to die anytime soon, you put it there. So then when EMS people come, they see that, they go, oh, this person doesn't want to go on the ventilator. So then, they call your doctor, the morgue, or whoever they call. Or they look on there, oh, this person wants A, B, not C, let's go do it. And then away they go.
Okay. What would be your recommendation for family members with a loved one who is in a ventilator?
Well, I think the most important thing in this very scary situation, because it is life and death, is that listen carefully to the healthcare team, particularly to the doctor. It's absolutely all right to hope for the best, but it's very important to have reasonable expectations. And so if the expectations are that maybe this isn't going to go so well, then, keep that in the back of your mind. But, it's absolutely all right for people to hope and pray and wish for a miracle and all that stuff. But at the same time, listen to the healthcare team and be realistic.
So if I don't live, and by the way, I would not want to be on a ventilator. If I don't leave the directives beforehand, who takes the decision?
Well, then that would be whoever is the spokesperson in your family. So, usually it's a spouse or children. But the thing of it is, if those people have not been involved in the decision, they may not make the best decision for the person on the machine, because the person on the machine may be totally miserable and want to die, and yet they can't give up their loved one. And so it becomes a real complicated thing at that point.
So may I ask more personally, what brought you to dedicate yourself to be a respiratory therapist and a doctor of public health?
Well, actually, it was an accident. I went to work in a hospital many years ago, about 50 years ago, and they offered me a job in housekeeping, or they had this new department called inhalation therapy at that time. And they said, well, if you have a science degree, we're looking for someone to become this inhalation therapist. So that sounded better to me. And I started doing it. I fell in love immediately. And I just lived it for the next 40, 50 years.
Where was that? Where was the location of that?
In Sarasota, Florida.
So what brought you to Hawaii?
Well, after being in the respiratory therapist for many years and involved in some very intense research in the 1970s, I decided I needed to take a break. So I was just going to travel the world and find something else to do. Well, I ended up back in the United States looking for a job again. And by that time, I was a professor of respiratory care and so I was looking for a warm place to live. And here was an ad for starting a school in Hawaii. I thought, wait a minute, that's a warm place. So, luckily I got hired by the university and started the respiratory therapy program here in about 1978.
So fast forward, what else have you done? Tell us a little bit. I know a little bit of your work, but I would like to hear from you. What else have you done?
Well, in the respiratory field, I'm particularly interested in asthma and asthma education. We have so much asthma in Hawaii, and if people manage their asthma well, they can keep it under control and have a great life. And that's just a real positive story all the way around. I've always been fascinated by mechanical ventilation because it's so complicated and the machines fascinate me, and that whole thing is very fascinating. At this time, I volunteer for the American Lung Association of Hawaii, and I help them meet their mission of lung health, keeping good air for us to breathe in Hawaii, reducing tobacco smoking, and those kinds of things.
Is there a big difference between states or even countries of how healthy and how we breathe better in some places than others?
In terms of our biological breathing, I think we're all on an even basis. But if you get sick, it's definitely not good to get sick if you don't have health care. And so in countries that are really lacking in health care for whatever reason, then it's going to be terrible. Like right now, I'm very concerned about what's going on in Brazil and in Tanzania and some countries like that, where Brazil has some excellent medicine for some people, but for other people, not so good. And in Tanzania, I'm not sure what medicine's like down there, but I'd rather be on a ventilator here.
I've been to Tanzania and Brazil, beautiful places, but yeah, I probably prefer to be here, not on a ventilator, but for healthcare. Um, I, I can I ask you the personal question of what would be your decision if you in the did you leave a directive for your loved ones of what you want to do?
Yes, yes. And, I would, at this point, I would choose to be on a ventilator. I
Okay.
have no reason to think that I've got an illness that is terminal that couldn't be reversed if I were put on a machine for a while and the doctors worked and turned my problem around, and I would be well again. So at this point, I'm ready to go on the machine.
Okay. Do you think it's painful, or are you sedated and you don't really know what's going on?
Well, a person is sedated. So let's say it's time for you to go on a ventilator. So you're very short of breath. You feel like you're dying each breath and you're struggling. And so what typically happens is you're sedated. And so now you're not feeling anything particularly. We stick the tube down the throat, we hook the machine up, we turn it on, and those sedations may wear off very quickly. And a person could possibly wake up at that point, and it would be a very terrifying situation, but at least you could breathe. And so the doctors generally keep a level of sedation, well, not generally, almost always keep a level of sedation so that people don't have to experience all of the difficulties of being on a ventilator. Because, you're in a bed, you can't move, you can't drink, you can't eat, you can't speak. I mean, the list goes on of pretty miserable things. But it's worth it to be alive 6 hours later or 6 days later.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's go back to our show, which is staying young at heart. So what is the advice for you for people to not reach that point that you have to get into a ventilator, or what is the pre-work that we can do in order to keep us healthy and staying young?
Well, I think that, right now wearing a mask and social distancing is a good way to avoid getting COVID-19 and ending up on a ventilator. But in general, healthy living, I mean, smoking tobacco is a horrible thing. And this new vaping that's out and about is really catching on and becoming more popular. People have got to stop doing that. And I mean, very briefly, people ask me, what's worse, smoking tobacco or vaping? I said, that's not the question. What's better, fresh air or vaping, or fresh air and tobacco? Well, obviously it's fresh air. So, that's what we can do to, and also don't use drugs. I mean, people using opioids, they use too much and they can't breathe. Well, that's not a good thing. And don't be shooting each other or getting run over by trucks.
Yeah, that's great advice that you would think is kind of logical and simple, but sometimes it's not, right? Any last words, Ron? Thank you so much for joining us. Please let us know any last words of wisdom that you have to share with our audience.
Well, I'm not sure about wisdom, but about the book, it's written for these families and friends of people on ventilators. And since it was just published, I really thank you for having me on your show, because I'm trying to get to that audience, and that's an audience that's difficult to get to. And so I think it's wonderful that you're having me on, and perhaps somebody who is wondering what in the world's going on in that ICU can pick up this book and look up what it is that makes them feel better.
Okay, I'll show it one more time. And you mentioned that they can buy it on Amazon or
Yes, Barnes
what?
and Noble,
Mhm.
Amazon, and then I have a website called aboutventilators.com. So very simple, aboutventilators.com. You can buy it there.
Okay, well, Ron Sanderson, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Our pleasure. And aloha, everyone. We'll see you in the next show. Have a good afternoon and take care of yourselves.